September 1862. The Confederacy was riding high. Robert E. Lee had just smashed John Pope at Second Bull Run, sent McClellan running from the peninsula, and now he was doing the unthinkable, taking the war north. On September 4th, 55,000 ragged, barefoot rebels started splashing across the Potomac into Maryland singing, "Maryland, my Maryland." Lee figured the border state would rise up, join the Confederacy, maybe even give Lincoln a heart attack. It almost worked. Lee split his army into 5 parts, an insane gamble by any standard. Stonewall Jackson took half the army to capture Harper's Ferry and its 12,000-man garrison. The rest marched toward Hagerstown. To coordinate everything, Lee wrote out Special Orders No. 191, for pages detailing exactly where every column would be and when. 3 copies were made. One went to Stonewall, one to D.H. Hill, and one got lost. On the morning of September 13th, 2 Union soldiers from the 27th Indiana were lounging in a meadow outside Frederick, Maryland, when Corporal Barton Mitchell spotted something in the grass. An envelope containing 3 cigars wrapped in a sheet of paper. The paper was Special Orders 191, addressed by command of General Robert E. Lee. Mitchell passed it up the chain. Within hours it landed on George McClellan's desk. McClellan, the same man who once told Lincoln, "I can do it all," read the orders and reportedly shouted, "Here is a paper with which, if I cannot whip Bobby Lee, I will be willing to go home." He had Lee's entire plan, knew exactly where every rebel division was, and for once he outnumbered the Confederates 2-1. He telegraphed Washington, "I have the whole rebel force in front of me. I think I can destroy them." He had 18 hours to hit Lee before the army could reunite. He took 36. By the time McClellan finally moved, Lee had gotten wind that something was wrong. D.H. Hill never received his copy of the orders. Turns out the courier gave it to the wrong general. So when Union troops started asking civilians about Lee's army being scattered everywhere, Lee knew the jig was up. He raced to concentrate his forces behind Antietam Creek near Sharpsburg, a tiny village with one road out. His back was to the Potomac. There was no retreat. On September 16th, McClellan's 87,000 men began arriving on the hills east of the creek. Lee had maybe 38,000, many still marching in from Harper's Ferry. The armies stared at each other across cornfields and pastures. Civilians fled. A Pennsylvania soldier wrote home, "We are on the eve of a terrible battle. God have mercy on us." Neither side slept much that night. Rebel campfires glowed on one ridge, Union on the other. In the distance, church bells from Sharpsburg rang nervously. Everyone knew the next day would be bad. No one knew it would become the single bloodiest day in American history. September 17th broke cold and misty. At 5:30 a.m. the first cannon thundered from the Union right. Joe Hooker's I Corps stepped off into a 24-acre cornfield owned by a farmer named David Miller. The corn stood taller than a man's head, ripe and golden. 30 minutes later, it was a slaughter pen. Hooker had 8,800 men in neat blue lines. Facing them across the Hagerstown Pike was Stonewall Jackson with 7,700 Confederates hidden in woods and behind fences. The 1st Union Brigade, mostly Pennsylvanians and New Yorkers, advanced at the double quick. When they reached the fence at the far edge of the corn, Confederate rifles erupted in a sheet of flame. One survivor wrote, "The corn seemed to be cut by a scythe. Men fell in rows exactly as they stood." In the next 30 minutes, the cornfield changed hands 6 times. Entire regiments vanished. The 1st Texas Infantry, 226 men strong, went into the corn and came out with 40. The 12th Massachusetts lost 67% of its men in 15 minutes, the highest percentage loss of any Union regiment in the entire war. Bodies lay so thick that one Confederate officer said you could walk across the field without touching the ground. By 7:30, the cornfield was on fire from burning cartridges. Wounded men screamed as the flames reached them. Hooker, watching from horseback, turned to an aide and said, "My God, we are murdering each other." He was shot in the foot minutes later and carried off the field. At 7:45, the Confederates counterattacked with John Bell Hood's 2 brigades, the toughest fighters in Lee's army. Hood had warned his men the night before, "If you don't hold this line, we lose the war tomorrow." They hit the Union line like a hammer. Hood himself lost 2 horses shot out from under him. When it was over, Hood's division was wrecked, 60% casualties in 20 minutes. Hood later said, "I never saw men fight as my Texans fought this morning." By 9 o'clock, the cornfield was quiet. 8,000 men lay dead or wounded in a space smaller than 12 football fields. A Union soldier wrote, "The corn leaves were spattered with blood as if it had rained blood. The ground was literally slick with gore." One Confederate recalled stepping over bodies and feeling brains and blood squishing under my boots. Farther south, at the same time, Sedgwick's division of 5,400 men marched into the West Woods in perfect parade formation. Jackson had pulled troops from the Cornfield slaughter and hidden them behind a ridge. When Sedgwick was completely surrounded on three sides, the rebels opened fire at point-blank range. In 20 minutes, Sedgwick lost 2,200 men, killed, wounded, or missing. Survivors described it as a whirlwind of lead. One man said the bullets sounded like a swarm of angry bees. By 10 a.m., the northern end of the field was a Confederate victory, but at a price no one could afford. Lee had used up almost every man he had on that flank. The Cornfield alone cost both armies more men than the entire Crimean War's Battle of Balaclava, the one with the charge of the Light Brigade. And the day was only half over. By 9:30 a.m., the fighting in the north had burned itself out, leaving the Cornfield a smoking ruin. McClellan now turned his attention to the center of Lee's line, a naturally strong position that would soon earn the most terrifying nickname of the entire war. A simple farm lane, worn waist-deep by years of wagon traffic and rain, ran east-west across a low ridge just south of the Dunker Church. Confederate General D.H. Hill had packed 2,500 Alabamians, North Carolinians, and Georgians into it like sardines behind a stone wall and split-rail fence. From the Union side it looked harmless, just a sunken road. From the inside it was a ready-made rifle pit. At 9:45 Major General William French's division, mostly Irish immigrants of the famous Irish Brigade, came stumbling out of the corn, still shaken from the morning slaughter, and walked straight into the mouth of hell. The rebels let them get within 30 yards before opening fire. One Union officer wrote, "It was not a battle, it was a massacre." For 3 solid hours the Confederates held the lane. Wave after wave of bluecoats charged up the gentle slope only to be shredded. Bodies piled 2 and 3 deep in front of the lane, forming a human breastwork. Confederate Private Alexander Hunter of the 17th Virginia remembered, "We just sat there and shot them down like sheep. The piles of dead got so high we had to push them over the wall to make room to load." By noon the road was literally running with blood. One survivor said you could wring blood out of your clothes like water. A photographer later wrote that the corpses were stacked so thick he could not avoid stepping on them. The lane had become a butcher's trench. At 12:30 p.m. the Union finally found the flaw. The 5th and 7th New York of Israel Richardson's division worked around the Confederate left flank and suddenly appeared on the ridge above the lane, firing straight down into the packed rebels. Panic spread. The Confederate line broke, and men fled rearward in a frantic rush. When the smoke cleared, 5,500 men lay dead or wounded along a 600-yard stretch of road. The sunken road had become Bloody Lane. Lee now had no center left. His line was split in two. A single fresh Union corps, there were still 3 untouched, could have marched straight through the gap and cut the Army of Northern Virginia in half. McClellan had 23,000 fresh troops and 300 cannon that had barely fired a shot. All he had to do was order the attack. He hesitated. While McClellan dithered, Lee frantically shifted the only reserves he had left, a few thousand men from the right flank, and patched together a new line along an old farm road. The afternoon sun climbed higher. The chance slipped away. But the day still had one more act of horror in store. By 1 p.m. the Confederate center was a gaping hole, and the right flank was almost empty. Lee had shifted every available man to plug Bloody Lane. Only one place still looked strong. The southern end of the field, where the 9th Corps under Ambrose Burnside faced a narrow stone bridge over Antietam Creek. The bridge was a death trap. 3 arches, 125 feet long, approached by a road that climbed a steep, open hill dominated by 500 Georgia sharpshooters hidden in trees and quarries on the far bank. Burnside had 12,000 men and orders from McClellan to carry the bridge at all hazards. It took him 9 hours. The first attacks went in at 10 a.m. The 11th Connecticut and 2 New York regiments charged down the road in perfect formation and were cut to pieces in minutes. Bodies floated downstream like logs. One Connecticut captain wrote, "We went forward until the bridge was a sheet of flame and the water red with blood." For 5 hours, Burnside threw regiment after regiment at that bridge. The Georgians, under Robert Toombs, a former U.S. senator turned brigadier, had perfect cover and unlimited ammunition brought up by boys running through the woods. They laughed as they fired, calling it a turkey shoot. The 51st New York and 51st Pennsylvania finally rushed the bridge at 3 p.m. after 2 earlier failures, wading the creek waist-deep under fire on both flanks and driving the Georgians out with the bayonet. It had cost 500 men to take a bridge that 12,000 could have forded upstream in 20 minutes if anyone had scouted properly. By the time Burnside got his corps across and reformed on the heights above Sharpsburg, it was nearly 4 p.m. Lee's army was on the ropes. One more push, and the road to the Potomac would be open. Then, out of nowhere, the sky filled with rebel yell. A.P. Hill's Light Division, 3,500 men who had marched 17 miles from Harper's Ferry since dawn, still wearing the red shirts they'd captured from the Union garrison, slammed into Burnside's exposed left flank. They had started at 2:30 a.m., crossed the Potomac at Bottler's Ford, and arrived at the exact moment Lee needed them most. Hill's counterattack rolled the Union 9th Corps back down the hill toward the creek in complete confusion. Burnside sent frantic messages to McClellan begging for reinforcements. McClellan had 20,000 fresh men and refused to release a single brigade. At 5:30 p.m. the firing sputtered out. The sun set red over the battlefield. The final tally was staggering. 22,717 total casualties in 12 hours of fighting. 3,654 dead, more Americans killed in one day than in the War of 1812, the Mexican War, and the Spanish-American War combined. 17,300 wounded, many mortally. 1,770 missing or captured. Lee held the field, but his invasion was finished. That night he told his generals, "Gentlemen, we will make our stand on these hills," then quietly ordered preparations to retreat. On the 18th he stood off a half-hearted Union advance, and under cover of darkness on the 19th the Army of Northern Virginia slipped back across the Potomac, ending the Maryland campaign. McClellan telegraphed Washington, "Our victory was complete. The enemy is driven back into Virginia." Lincoln read the dispatch, looked at the casualty lists, and fired off a single sentence to McClellan. "If you are not using the army, I should like to borrow it for a while." Antietam was a tactical draw, but a strategic Union victory. The dead lying in rows at the Cornfield, along Bloody Lane, and around that little stone bridge bought something priceless. 5 days later, on September 22, 1862, Abraham Lincoln issued the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. Britain and France, who had been ready to recognize the Confederacy, backed away. The war had changed forever on the bloodiest day America ever endured.